Good morning, everybody. We are right in the middle of a series called Love, Sex, and Dating. I want to welcome everybody who's sitting here, everybody who's sitting out in the cafe, and everybody who's even watching on Facebook Live. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Did you know this, that the average American checks their cell phone about 150 times a day? Does that sound right, or does that not sound right to you? I mean, I have a high school student, so I think he checks it more of like 150 times a minute. But 150 times a day, that means that the average person checks their phone about once every 5 or 6 minutes during the day. That means that hopefully you can resist the urge to take out your little precious during this sermon. You know, that is unless you want to write down some amazing sermon notes that I have for you today. That also means that during the normal course of this sermon that you would probably open up your phone, engage your phone, look at your phone, glance at your phone at least 5 or 6 times during this sermon. Now, you know what social scientists are telling us? Social scientists are telling us that you and I are so addicted to technology that we are actually experiencing this phenomenon right here, that it's called phantom vibration sensation. Do you know what phantom vibration sensation is? For those of you who don't even know what it is, you probably understand what I'm talking about. That there's a time when your phone is in your pocket and you were absolutely sure that somebody was trying to contact you. You thought that your phone was buzzing, and then you opened it up and you realized that it never was buzzing. How many of you have ever experienced that? Would you go ahead and raise your hands? Absolutely. That we thought somebody was trying to contact us, that we thought somebody was trying to communicate us, we thought somebody was trying to text us, because obviously we're that important of a person, but that person actually never ended up doing that. And we were like, I mean, our phone is already open. I might as well go on Amazon and now buy something. Because that one-click buy option is just devastating, isn't it? There's no turning back once you hit that one. And this is what we know about that sensation, that we're not really feeling it, obviously, that we're not really feeling it as much as our brain is craving it. That we are feeling what we are not feeling because our brain is craving something that we don't have. Because every time our phone buzzes inside of our pocket, our body releases what's called a dopamine hit. You know what dopamine is? Dopamine is what floods your body with those warm, fuzzy feelings. And because you have those warm, fuzzy feelings, you want to have that feeling over and over and over and over and over. Well, let me ask you this. How does that relate to love? How does that relate to sex? How does that relate to dating? Well, I'm glad that you asked that question, because what you're going to find is this, that it used to be back in the day that in order to meet somebody that you actually had to meet somebody. Now that sounds kind of funny, but it used to be back in the day that in order to meet somebody that you had to meet somebody face to face. You had to go to a restaurant, or you had to go to a bar, or you had to go to a church in order to meet somebody, but yet we find that that's not the case anymore. Even the movie You've Got Mail almost seems kind of outdated, that you would have to that you would have to use email in order to meet somebody? I don't even use email anymore. What, are we going to meet somebody through smoke signals too? I mean, even the whole idea of meeting somebody through Match.com or eHarmony almost kind of seems like a thing of the past. Do you know why? Because our entire lives have moved to this thing right here. This is our mobile device. And one of the most popular if you want to call it a dating app on your phone, is something called Tinder. Now, if you don't know what Tinder is, you're about to get an education. If you do know what Tinder is, then what I want you to do is I want you to pretend like you're really confused and you have no idea what I'm talking about. And hopefully your phone is on silent so that you actually don't get Tinder notifications during this sermon. But Tinder is really nothing more than a dating, or more like a hookup app, where you create this profile picture of yourself. Social media, you create this profile picture of yourself. You create this brief bio where you lie about who you are, right? Here's my Tinder profile right here. You probably didn't know that. I cannot believe it's not butter. But that's what we want to do. We want to create this picture that maybe vaguely seems like us, because honestly, doesn't that look like me? Oh, that vaguely seems like us, but that portrays us in a good light. We write this bio where we totally lie about ourselves. And what we do is you create this profile that you look at other people's profile, and maybe you've heard this term before. You swipe left for no, and you swipe what? You swipe right for yes. This app is a lot of times used by young, urban, career-minded professionals that obviously don't have time for dating. They do not want to get married, but of course what they want to do is they want to engage in the benefits of marriage, and they want to have sex. It said that you can be on your Tinder app in the afternoon and be sleeping with somebody by that night. That is the world that we live in. When it comes to our phones, not only are we talking about dating, but we're also talking about pornography. Our phones have made pornography more accessible than any other time in the history of the world. In fact, again, there used to be a day and age where if you're old enough to remember this, you couldn't get your hands on pornography even if you wanted to. Because your drunk Uncle Billy kept them locked up in his, gun safe, or your dad had them locked underneath a floorboard in the attic or something like that. But now, everything is streamed from right here. It has never been more accessible in the history of the world. In fact, here's some statistics about pornography right here, that 36% of the entire internet is all pornography. That at any given moment in our country, that 1.7 million pornographic videos are being streamed. And think about this for a second. This is part of the reason why you have to get your kid at Ignite. It's because 1/3 of all 13 to 14-year-old boys are not only watching pornography, but they're considered pornography addicts, watching about 50 videos every single week. Believe it or not, there are actually porn detox camps for young adolescents who want to stop watching pornography, but just cannot seem to do it. And so this is the world that we're living in. This is the world that we're living in. And so what do we do? What do we do in this world that we're living in? I mean, for me, you know what I want to do? I want to lock my daughter in a walk-in closet with a case of water and a box of ammo until Jesus comes back. But we can't do that. Not only can we not do that because we shouldn't do that, but we can't do that because even Christ doesn't want us to do that, because we can't reach the world if we're hiding from the world. You know what the Bible tells us? The Bible tells us that we are to be in the world, but not of the world. And yet we as Christians, it's so easy for us to make one of two different mistakes. We're either in the world and we look like the world, we're acting like the world. There is no differentiation between us and the standards of the world. Or what we're doing is we're locking ourselves at home, we're locking ourselves in our Christian schools, we're locking ourselves in our Christian institutions, and never the two shall meet. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves as Christians is, well, how do we live in this world where the standards are so different and yet not allow the standards to affect and to infiltrate who we are? Well, the Apostle Paul speaks to that. And the Apostle Paul, what he wants to do is he wants to speak to this little gathering, this little ecclesia of Christians in the city of Corinth. You have to understand that Corinth is a very metropolitan city, which means that everybody wore skinny jeans there. It was also a port city. All different influences came into Corinth, which also means that if it was a port city, that it was a city that was full of prostitution. In fact, the city of Corinth was full of temple prostitution, and yet what you're going to find is that the Apostle Paul wants to speak to this group of believers to say that God has created this very powerful and yet this very fragile thing called our sexuality. And so how are we to use that, and how are we to operate that in a way that's honoring before God? Well, he says this brief phrase right here in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 18. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 18 simply says this. Why don't you go ahead and read that with me? Just 3 words. Here we go, everybody. Flee sexual immorality. That's it, right? Flee sexual immorality. Now, in the next chapter, in chapter 7, he's going to define sexual immorality for us, that sexual immorality is any kind of sex or sexual activity outside of marriage. And yet I think it's interesting the type of counsel that he has for us. That he's saying that sexual immorality is something that's so strong and that the temptation within inside of us is so weak that I don't want you to fight it. I don't want you to stand up underneath it. I don't want you to try and resist it. I want you to go ahead and just run away, run away, run away. Then I want you to flee from sexual immorality. Now, here's what I want to do. Before I talk about the immorality of sex, what I want to do is I would like to speak about the morality of sex. And I want to talk about the fact that sex is not something that was always meant to be dirty and tawdry and embarrassing and never talked about in church, and then only in our absence discussed in the locker room by 13-year-old boys, for goodness sake. What I want to do is I want to talk about God's original design and intention for our sexuality to begin with. Because what you're going to find is this, that from the very beginning, from Genesis chapter 1, from literally the very first page of your Bible, that God is already talking about sex. Genesis chapter 1, verses 27 through 28, it says this. Genesis chapter 1. It doesn't get any earlier than that, right? 27 and 28, it says this. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, what? Be fruitful. What does that mean? That means have sex, right? I mean, so in other words, as man and wife come together for the first time, he's saying that I don't want your activity to be the first dance, that I don't want your activity to be cutting the cake, that I don't want it to be tossing the garter belt or the bouquet, that the first thing that I want you to do is have sex. Not only does he say be fruitful, but what does he say? He says this, increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. I can almost picture God coming to Adam and Eve and saying this, yes, I have created you, but here's what I'm going to do. Here's what I'm going to do. I ain't creating any more people except for you and you. And from now on, what's going to happen is I'm going to now use you to create every other person in the history of the world. And guess what? You ain't going to do that by digging around in the dirt and exchanging ribs back and forth. That you are going to do it through this wonderful, masterful gift of sex that I have created for you, that has been meant for the cementing of two bodies and souls and spirits with one another. In fact, this gift of sex is so important to God that, believe it or not, God devoted an entire book of the Bible to it. Do you know what that book is called? It's called the Song of Solomon. Song of Solomon, chapter 4, verses 10 through 11, it says this. How delightful is your love, my sister, my bride. How much more pleasing is your love than wine, and the fragrance of your perfume than any other. That your lips drop sweetness as the honeycomb, my bride. And look at this, that milk and honey are under your tongue. Let me ask you a question here. How would he know that milk and honey are underneath her tongue? How would he know that? Is this a French kiss? No, it's not, because France hasn't even been established yet. This is a Jewish kiss. This is a Bible kiss. This is a Hebrew kiss. You know what he's talking about? He's talking about the fact that divine love is pleasing. That in the process of one man and one woman under the covenant of marriage, that there's something that's sensual, and it's the fact that time just kind of stops. And it's not even about simply the fact that they're just trying to have children. No, they're engaging in this activity for their own mutual enjoyment. I mean, this is part of the reason why we as Christians believe in birth control, because sex isn't just a mechanical activity where we want to procreate the next generation, but that sex was meant for our mutual enjoyment. Married people, can I talk to you for a second? Married people, according to the Bible, this is the case. If you are not engaging in frequent and consistent lovemaking, you are living in sin. Amen. And some of you, some of you are like, honey, we are getting our lives right with God today. Do you know why I say that? And it's not my own personal opinion. It is what the Bible tells us. What does the Bible tell us? In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 4 through 5, it actually says this, that the wife's body does not belong to her alone, but man, I'm glad somebody said amen, because you could hear a pin drop in this place. Woo! It's getting hot in here. The wife's body does not belong to her alone, but also to her husband. In the same way, the husband's body does not belong to him alone, but also to his wife. Listen to this verse right here. Do not deprive each other. You know what he's saying? He's saying don't stop having sex. And this isn't a suggestion. It's not wise counsel. That is in the imperative form, which means it's a command. He's saying this, do not deprive each other. Don't stop having sex unless, now what he's about to do is he's saying that you can't stop having sex as a married couple unless, then he outlines 3 different biblical conditions by which, the only conditions by which you as a married couple may stop having sex. Those 3 conditions are this right here, that it might be by mutual consent. Isn't it interesting that when we talk about consensual sex in our culture, it's all about 2 people agreeing to have sex. In the Bible, as he talks about 2 married couple having consensual sex, it's about consensual non-sex. That 2 people must agree to not have sex in order to not have sex. That is condition number 1. Condition number 2 is that it may be for a time. That in other words, that it is purposeful and not accidental. That it may not be, honey, whoa, it's been so long. Like I can't even remember the last time. Gosh darn it, we've been so busy. That it must be for a specific period of time and for the purpose of what? For the purpose of that you may devote yourselves to prayer. In other words, that you may not stop having sex because you're angry at each other. That you may not stop having sex because you're bitter at each other. But that the only reason you are to stop having sex is for the purpose of prayer. And by the way, I have never been that godly of a man. Then he says this, listen to this. Then come together again. Once those 3 conditions have been met, then after that time is done, then come together again so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. You know what the Apostle Paul is saying? The Apostle Paul is saying this right here, that sex is a mandate for married people and for you not to engage in this gift that God has given you. It's almost like God has given me, my parents have given me a brand new car, and yet I never use that car. Guess what? My parents are going to feel a little bit upset about that. It's the same thing with sex. God has given you this amazing, amazing gift. And for you to not use that gift, by this verse, is tantamount to you allowing Satan in your marriage. What does that say? It says this, then come together so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. And can I tell you this, as somebody who's pastored for almost 20 years, someone who has been married for almost 20 years, let me give you a little observation that I have. That long before the ink ever dried on somebody's divorce papers, you know what ended up drying up first? Their intimacy, their closeness, and their sexual activity between that man and that woman underneath the covenant of marriage. One of the best things that you can do for your marriage is to enjoy the gift of sex that God has given you. Here's the thing that we know about sex, that sex is not only pleasurable, but that sex is powerful as well. That sex is not only pleasurable, but that it is powerful. That is why it says this in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 18. We'll go ahead and come back to that verse. It says this right here, that we are to flee from sexual immorality. God is giving us a bit of a warning, isn't he? That we are to flee from sexual immorality. And why is he giving us that warning? Because anything that's that powerful comes with warnings. Whenever you have something powerful, it's going to come with warnings. Whenever you have something powerful, it's going to come with instructions. So in other words, God has not only given us this gift, but he's also told us how it is that we are to use that gift. I mean, it's almost kind of like when you go to Home Depot and you buy a chainsaw. Part of the reason why they call it a chainsaw, there's a reason why they call it a power tool, because it is very powerful. And because it is very powerful, whenever you pick up a chainsaw at Home Depot, guess what? It's going to come with all sorts of warnings. It's going to come with all sorts of stickers on it. It's going to come with a paper that has all sorts of lawyers speak on it. It's going to have all sorts of instructions on how you are to use the chainsaw, how you are not to use the chainsaw. And let me tell you this, when you pick up that chainsaw and you have all of those warnings and instructions, do you automatically assume that Home Depot hates you? Do you automatically assume that Home Depot is just trying to ruin all of your fun with the chainsaw? No, they're trying to keep you from chopping your freaking arm off, is what they're trying to do. So anything good is going to come with instructions. Rules are for our good, right? Which is part of the reason why he says this. Verse 18, that all other sins a man commits are outside his body, but he who sins sexually sins against his own body. You know what he's doing? The Apostle Paul is about to tell us something that from 2,000 years ago that we already intuitively know. And that is this right here. That sexual sin is like no other sin. That sexual sin is like no other sin. That he says this, that all other sins a person commits are outside of the body. But that sexual sin is the only sin that someone commits against their own body. In other words, let me even translate this for you a little bit. That all other sins that you can commit are in one category, and that sexual sin is in a category all by itself. You know why that is? It's not because God hates it more. It's not because God is going to judge it more harshly. It's not because God is not going to forgive you of that sin. Part of the reason why God says that it's in a category all by itself is because of the damage that it does to the both people that are involved. And if you don't believe me, then let me ask you this. Why is it that when someone's sexually abused as a child, when they grow up and become an adult and they begin to connect the dots a little bit, why is that incident so difficult to get over in their lives? Why is the whole story of Dr. Nassar so absolutely heinous? That there would be a grown man who would sexually abuse and molest, over 150 young women over a span of 20 to 30 years. Why is that so absolutely disgusting to us? Why is it that we're never going to ever hear any of those gymnasts ever say, yeah, dirty old man touched me inappropriately, but, it's not a big deal. I'll get over it. Why is it that when anyone ever comes to me and says, hey, pastor, I need to talk to you, and I need to tell you something that I've never told anyone in my life, why is it that I know that that person is not going to say, hey, you know what? I was at the mall, I was backing up, I hit somebody else's car, and I forgot to leave a note. Why is it that when that person says, hey, I need to tell you something I've never told anyone before, why is it that I always know that that confession is going to be sexual in nature? Do you know why? Because when we engage our bodies, that we're not simply engaging our bodies. That we're engaging something so much deeper, so much more meaningful than that. Which is part of the reason why the Apostle Paul goes on to say this in verses 19 through 20. He says, do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, whom you received from God? That your body, that you are not your own, that you were bought at a price. And therefore, here's what I want you to do. I want you to honor God with your body. Married people, I've already talked to you for a second. Single people, here's what I want you to do. I have some advice for you, and that is this, that right now, before you get married, I want you to determine what is the story, what is the future story that one day you want to tell. What is the story that you want to tell? And what I mean by that is this, that one day what's going to happen, I promise you this is going to happen, you're going to find somebody that you want to spend the rest of your life with, and that person wants to spend the rest of their life with you, and what's going to happen is you are going to tell them, you are going to unearth the story of your life. And you are going to tell them everything that you've done and the person that you have done it with. And in light of how you want that conversation to go, I want you to live in light of that right there. Because there are only a couple different options, right? One option is this. You know what? I was in high school at the time, and, I thought I was in love. And so we spent the night together. When I was younger, I thought I was in love. And so we spent the weekend together. I thought I was in love. And so we decided that we were going to live together for a short time. You ask, how many? Well, that's not really going to help you to know how many. And so, all I want to say is that I'm really, really, really committed to you. I really, really, really love you. And I really want to turn over a new leaf. That's one story that you can tell, right? I mean, part of what even drives us to even kind of think like that is because there's this crazy false idea that on our wedding night, we can't not know what we're doing. On our wedding night, we can't be a virgin. On our wedding night, we can't look stupid. But here's what I want to ask you. What's the win in all of that? Do you think the other person's going to be like this? On our wedding, what, you practiced? You practiced and you practiced and you practiced? Hours and hours and hours just for me? Oh, that's so sweet. Do you think the other person's going to say that? I mean, here's 19 years of marriage advice coming right at you. On your wedding night, it's okay to look stupid. Okay, you'll figure it out. It's not like, playing the violin. Okay. So that's one story you can tell. Here's the other story that you could tell. You could say this. That when I was in high school, yeah, I fooled around a little bit. When I was older, I messed around a little bit. But you know what? I kind of didn't know better. My parents never taught me that that was the way that I should live. And then one day, I walked into this ridiculous church. And I don't even remember what the name of the church is. I don't remember what the name of the pastor was, except for the fact that he always talked too fast. And on that day, I heard something that I feel like I'd never, ever heard in my whole life. And it just kind of took me off guard, and it surprised me. But it was in that moment that I realized, you know what, that's That's the way that God wants me to live. And so ever since then, I've been living my life with you in mind. From that day forward, I decided that I was going to save myself for you. From that day forward, I determined that I was going to save my body, my soul, my spirit for you. From that day forward, I decided that even if I dated other people, that I would date other people with you in mind. And so as I have learned to honor God with my body before we've said I do, now I'm ready to honor God with my body once we've said I do. That's a much better story than the other story. So single people, all I want to say is this. However you want that to play out, now here's what I want you to do. I want you to live with that in mind. Why don't you bow your heads and pray?